Okay, good evening, everybody. The week before Rosh Hashanah. This time next week, Bezat Hashem, will be all together in a new year. And the rite of passage that we're going to be experiencing is accompanied by the Shofar. The Shofar is central to Rosh Hashanah. That's the mitzvah of the day. Not tshuva. The mitzvah is to blow the shofar. It's a Yom Adin. Now, if you think about it, the fact that Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Adin, a day of judgment, Rosh Hashanah is something which is so axiomatic that we don't even question it. What's that got to do with it being the beginning of the year? What does din, judgment, mi yichiyeh, mi yomus, who will live, who will die, mi yanuach, mi yanua, who will come be at rest, who will wander. What has that got to do with the beginning of the year? I mean, lahavdil, we see, certainly in England, the beginning of the year is usually a cause for people to drink rather too much and jump into fountains. And Klal Yisrael stand with this mixture of joy and fear, as it says in the Pasuk, Gilu Baroda, rejoice in fear, that peculiar synthesis of the ability to be able to rejoice in fear is something I would suggest is something specifically Jewish, and it's specifically connected with the idea of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah was a Yom Tov. It has a din of a Yom Tov, a din of a Suda, a meal. Halacha is you're not allowed to fast on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, it's a din in the poskim, but the halacha is you're not allowed to fast. It's a din of Yom Tov. So what has this idea of judgment got to do with the new year? Well, let's remember that really Rosh Hashanah is not really the beginning, doesn't commemorate the beginning, the creation. It commemorates the birth of Adam Rishon, the first man. Adam Rishon is the summit of the creation. Man was the last thing to be created. He is the summit, the purpose of all creation, that there should be a being who will recognize his maker. And so we have to understand that that's really, it's Adam Harishon's birthday, Adam Harishon, and we're all descendants of that first man. There's an interesting medrash that darshans the pasuk Naaseh Adam, let us make man. Right at the beginning of the Torah, Hashem says Naaseh Adam, let us make man. Chazal tell us that when Hashem was about to create the world, create man, that he, so to speak, took counsel with the Pamalil Shalmala, his heavenly court. Chazal teaches this shows however that can be understood, of course, but that's what it says. He took counsel, and this shows the humility of Hashem, that before he did something like this, he took counsel. And apparently what happened was there was the equivalent of a cosmic argument upstairs. The midah, the quality of emet, truth, says, Al Yibare, don't create man. Why? Because he's maleh sheker, maleh shkarim. He is full of untruth, of lies. Not just that he says lies, that's his essence. He's a liar. Do not create man. The midah, the character trait, the representative, so to speak, of the virtue of tzedek, righteousness. Literally, righteousness is rightness, doing the right thing. I always think it's rather telling that the English word for what we call tzedakah is charity. Charity sounds like I'm, Mr. Good Guy, but the word tzedakah is based on tzedek. I'm not doing anything more than what's right. Giving quote-unquote charity is the right thing to do. It's not that I'm going beyond my what's demanded of me. That is demanded of me. That's a basic requisite. But anyway, the midah of tzedek, of righteousness said, create him. Yibare, let man be created, create man to Hashem. Why? Because man is capable of doing tzedek. He's capable of righteousness. So this argument between the different midot in Shemayim carried on, and the Medrash darshaning, expounding the posuk Naaseh Odom. If you take the word Naaseh Odom, which means let us make man, and again, as we said before, the reason it's in the plural, Naaseh, is to show Hashem's humility that he took counsel before he did this. But if you change the nekudot, please stop me if I'm saying things you don't understand. If you change the nekudot, the punctuation underneath Naaseh, you could read it as Naasa Adam. Naasa Adam, meaning man has been made. What does this mean? It means that in the middle of that cosmic debate, man was created. Naaseh Adam, man is already made. Man came into existence, so to speak, as quite literally a cosmic question mark. The jury had not returned its verdict. The litigants, the protagonists, were still arguing it out. Create him, don't create him, Naaseh Adam. Meaning man comes into existence as a question. That question was never actually decided. And therefore, this is why Rosh Hashanah is a day of din. Because axiomatically we understand that Jewish festivals, Jewish commemorances are not historical. They're not days where we remember things. On a deeper level, they are days where we re-experience the same spiritual landscape that took place as at the original event. Every Shabbat is not a commemoration, just a zeicher of the first Shabbat. It's an experience we go through, so to speak. If you remember, everybody had a toy train when they were a kid, right? I hope everybody had a toy train. Right now, one thing, the main difference between a toy train and trains in the rest of the world is every toy train that I'm aware of, unless you're extremely wealthy, goes in a circle, right? Over the bridge, through the tunnel, through the station, over the bridge, through the tunnel, right? So that is Jewish time. Every week we come to a station called Shabbos. Every year we come to a station called Rosh Hashanah. It's the same station, and therefore as we pass through that same station in time, that same question, that same debate is awakened, so to speak, in Shemayim. Naaseh, man should be created, yes or not? Yibareh, al tibareh. Create him, don't create him. Each one of us, therefore, stands in the dock, and each one of us is examined based on that premise, on that investigation. Was it worth creating man for you, for me? That's why the beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, the birthday of Adam, when Adam came into existence, is also a day of din, because it's on that day that same din, that same court case, again, the books are opened up again on each one of us to see to what extent did we answer that question. Should man have created? Yes or no? Tibareh, Yibareh, al tibareh. And how do we answer it? We answer it with the shofar. The shofar, Chazal teaches, has the ability, what does it do?
Opens the gates of Shemayim.
Yes, but the shofar also, in a mystical sense, so to speak, makes Hashem rise up from the throne, the kisei of din, of judgment, and sit on the kisei of rachamim, of mercy. Now, it should be, we have to first of all make a distinction between something which is called rachamim, which is mercy, and chesed, which is kindness. Often they're confused. Hashem's kindness is indiscriminate. It says the Hashem is mechased, he gives chesed l'tovim u'leroim, to the good and the bad. Chesed doesn't take any account as to who you are. It's a matnas chinom, it's a free gift. You don't have to earn chesed. Rachimim, however, has to be earned. A person has to earn rachimim. He has to be. Mercy is something that you only get if you deserve it. And somehow the shofar creates a situation where we merit rachamim. Because by blowing the shofar, and we have to understand what is this blowing this ram's horn exactly, what does that do? What's that all about? That makes Hashem get up from the Kisei Adin and sit on the Kisei Rachamim. Now, of course, this all should be predicated with the idea that we've all spent Elul hopefully doing tshuva, and we're approaching Rosh Hashanah at least in a higher state of spiritual awareness and closest to Hashem than we started off Chodesh Elul. But nevertheless, the main thing that happens on Rosh Hashanah is we blow the shofar, and in that we will stand in din, it says. That's how we're going to stand in din. That's how we're going to survive the din. How we're going to pass from one side to the other. How does it do that? It says, let's get a chumash. We have some chumashim here?
It's fine, already.
It'd be useful if everybody can, thank you very much. Are there a few there?
Yep.
1 for 2 is fine.
4, past 4.
Right back at the beginning of the Torah, on the 6th day, this is in the Art Scroll, page 8. No, it's not. Excuse me a second.
You look for Asher Yisrael?
1 second, just give me a second. Yep, sorry, it is page 10. Page 10, it's Posuk Ches, 8. Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim. And Hashem, talking about the creation of man, how was man created? Man was created with breath. I just want to point out quite obviously that the shofar is a mitzvah of breath. Vayipach ba'apov, and Hashem, this is page 10, Perek Beis, Posik Ches, verse 8 in the English. If you're in the English, this is going to be page 11, at the bottom of the last page, the last verse on the page. Hashem planted a garden in Eden, to the east and placed there man. Sorry, no, 7. I take it back. I'm sorry, excuse me. It's not Ches, it's Zion. Vayipach ba'apov. You see, I thought it was Ches because
Yeah, it seems
it's in right. Okay, back up. It's halfway through Posuk Zayin. Let's start with Posuk Zayin. Vayitza Hashem Elokim es ha'adam, and Hashem formed man as dust from the earth. Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim, and he breathed into man's nostrils. Nishmas chayim. How does he translate that? The soul of life. Vayhi Adam lenefesh chaya, and man became a living being. Now, there's a few interesting things. First of all, we see that life was given through breath, and the breath was given through the nose. Life comes in through the nose. And I was just thinking before, it's interesting that which is the organ of the body which is the first one to be able to detect the absence of life? The nose. When things die, the way you know about it first is through the nose. That same organ which received life is the most sensitive to life, and therefore senses the absence of life. there's nothing worse than the smell, and Baruch Hashem, I haven't experienced it, but I had a chavrusa who told me that there was somebody who went missing. I think it was out somewhere near Beit Shemesh many years ago. And they sent out people to find him. And it took them a while to find him. And he was dead. And he said that the smell was something that you just cannot possibly imagine. To the extent that life fills a person, so is the absence of that life creates the most terrible, terrible smell. Again, the organ of life comes in through the nose. And he said it was such a bad smell that for weeks afterwards, all the showers that he had and all this, he just could not, it's the most, lower lane, you should never know about it. Why am I going to these details? Because this is where life comes in. Life comes in as breath. Now, look at the pasuk again. Vayipach ba'apov, and he breathed into his nostrils. Nishmas chaim, a spirit of life, vayhi adam lenefesh chaya, and man, as a result of having life breathed into him, became a nefesh achaya. If you look just across at the Targum Onkelos, Onkelos is Targum into Aramaic, translation to Aramaic. He translates nefesh chaya as ruach mamalala, which means a speaking spirit. The essence of life is speech. Now I want to go a little bit deeper here. There are two kinds of speech. There's, as it says in the pasuk, lahagid baboker chasdecho ve'emunosecha baleilos. It's a verse that we say, it's Mizmor Shir Le'om HaShabbos, the psalm of the Shabbos day, which was written by Adam HaRishon, the first man. Lahagid baboker chasdecho. Lahagid means to speak of, to relate. Baboker, in the morning, chasdecho, your kindnesses. Ve'emunosecha, and your faith, your faithfulness, baleilos, at nights. Here we see there are two kinds of speech. Lahagid baboker chasdecho, to speak about the chesed of Hashem in the morning, in the day. And there's another speech, there's a speech of the night, which is connected to Emuna, belief, faith. Try and stay with me. This is a subtle, deep idea which I will try and give over to you to the best of my ability. There are two kinds of speech. There's a speech which is connected to the daylight, the speech of visibility, the speech of being able to relate and share to other people, where we see the chesed of Hashem, where Hashem, so to speak, relates to us. We see everything. And we can share those things. We all exist, so to speak, in the light, in a common system of communication. But there's another speech. There's a deeper speech. A speech which, if you would like to call it, would be the inarticulate speech of the heart, like the cry of the soul, like the inarticulate blast of the shofar. And that is emunascha, to talk about, to express emunascha baleilos, your emuna, your faithfulness at night. Now, what is night? The word in Hebrew for night is choshech. It's connected to a word which we see in the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, where Hashem says to Avram Avinu, "V'lo chasachta es bincha es yichidecha." You have not withheld chasachta, your son, your firstborn, your only one. So the idea of darkness is mania, is holding back, the removal of lo chasachta. You haven't held back. Real darkness is not just like being out on a slightly less. It's difficult for us to conjecture real darkness. because we're so used to a world full of electric light. We manage to kill the night. But if you've ever been in a place where it's completely dark, in a room, it's actually coming to my mind now an experiment they did back in the 60s, where they took somebody and they put him in a rubber suit with air in water at blood temperature, and it was basically a sensory deprivation. They removed all sense of the outside world. This is what real darkness is. And it's in that darkness, the removal of the day, the relationship of ourselves to the outside world, that we have to speak about the Emuna. That's where Emuna is. What is Emuna? What is belief in God? Emunoscha, real Emuna, takes place in the night. And again, not the sort of night we're talking about, where everything else is removed from a person, except that voice inside him. Now, as we said, there are two kinds of speech. There's a kind of speech which expresses, as we said, we can compare, we can argue, this is a table, it's a yellow table, no, it's a beige table. A world of matanum, communication. But as we're saying, there's another speech. There's a speech which takes place, let me put it a different way. The knowledge of a person's, how can I express this? All kinds of knowledge. Everything in the world almost is open to debate, is open to discussion, to extrapolation, to say this is not like this, to compare, to argue. There's one piece of knowledge that a person has, which is deeper than all other knowledge. It's not an intellectual thing at all. It's something which can't be contradicted, and it's something that can't be proved. It's not open to discussion whatsoever. It's something, an awareness, a knowledge that the person has that doesn't go through any intellectual process whatsoever, and that is the knowledge of I. My sense of my own, the truth of my own existence is something, I don't arrive at the knowledge of my own existence by a question and answer, am I here? Oh yes, I am. It's nothing I arrive at intellectually. It is something which is a knowledge which is deep beneath any other kind of knowledge. You can't argue with me. You can't convince me I'm not here. It's the thing I have which is most secure in my entire life is the knowledge of my own existence. It reminds me of a joke about the fellow who was being sentenced, was convicted of murder. And the judge said to him, would you like to say anything? And he said, you, judge, and the whole court here are just figments of my imagination. So the judge says, fine, I'm sentencing you to the imaginary electric chair. We play these games, we all did it at university, maybe I'm really not here. It's just not true. A person, the certainty of my own existence is something that I'm totally sure of. And I can't communicate it to anybody else. Each one of us understands the sense of their own existence with regard to themselves. I can't communicate that to you. That knowledge, that experience, the certainty, the knowledge of my existence is not something that I can give to you. Each one of us has it with regard to himself. But it's not something we can discuss, not something we can debate. This deepest knowledge, the knowledge of I, Anochi, this is a different kind of speech. And that is the inarticulate speech of the heart knowing itself. And I want to move slightly deeper than this now. And that's what we express in the Shofar. Who am I? That inarticulate blast that comes out of the mouth, the life that went into our nostrils, we return to Hashem through the mouth, through the power of speech, but it's a speech which is inarticulate. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, was kvad peh. He was, they sometimes translate it as he stuttered, or he was, what's the word in English when you can't speak well? He was challenged. He couldn't speak properly. Kvad peh, literally heavy of mouth. The reason that Moshe was kvad peh was not because he had a physical disability. It's because he was living on such a high level, connected to such a high level of existence, that he quite simply could not put into words where he was. He was kvad peh. That is the level of the shofar. That is the level of the sound, which is an inarticulate speech, which is the deepest sense of the expression of our own identity. Now let's take this one step further. We discussed at Sukkot that Klal Yisrael underwent at the Har Sinai, not Sukkot, sorry, Shavuos. A little bit of background. The Torah is the blueprint of the world. The blueprint of the world is not just like as one would understand it, with an architect who makes his blueprint, builds the building, and then the blueprint really ceases to have any essential value. It's an interesting artifact after the fact, excuse the pun. But in terms of the maintaining of the creation, it has absolutely zero input. This is not true with the Torah. The Torah is not only the blueprint of the world, but it continues to give sustenance, kiyum, existence to everything in the world. The only reason anything can exist in the world is it because it has a phrase, a verse, a letter, and maybe even a dot in the Torah from where it's drawing its novea, it flows its ability to exist. This is something axiomatic. The Torah is quite literally from where the world takes its energy. The power station of existence is the Torah. Hashem put into the Torah this ability to give the world. The Torah exists, the Ramban says, 2,000 years before the creation of the world, as black fire on white fire. Nothing can exist in the world unless it has some posuk, some word in the Torah giving it life force. Man, as we saw before, man was created with the posuk, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. This powered man from the day of creation until Klal Yisrael stood at Sinai, and Hashem said, Anochi, I am the Lord your God, who took you out of Egypt. At that point, Chazal teach us that their souls left their bodies. They died. Why? Because when Hashem spoke, the revelation of all life, of the source of all life, was like an irresistible magnet which drew back all life outside of itself to itself. When the source of something is revealed, it becomes an irresistible magnet for all life that exists. And therefore they died. Not because Hashem killed them, Khalila, it's because the life force could not stay within their bodies. Hashem, it says, the Medrash says, the Gemara in Shabbos says that Hashem brought them back to life again. So man basically existed from the time from creation until Har Sinai with the dynamo, with the electricity which came from the Posuk Na'aseh Adam. At that point at Sinai, it came to an end. And when their souls came back down into their bodies, it was powered by a different word in the Torah. And that word is the first word of the Ten Commandments, Anochi. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Anochi is I forget the word in English. What's it called when you take the first letter of something?
Advash.
No. Sorry? Thank you. An acronym. Thank you. I'm glad you came. An acronym. Anochi, Ana, Nafshis, Kesivas, Yahavis. Anochi, Aleph, Aramaic. Anochi, I, Nafshis, myself. Kesavis, have written, Yehavis, and given over. I, myself, have written and given over. I, says Hashem, myself, I've put myself into the Torah, I've written into the Torah, and I've given it over to you. Meaning that from the moment that Klal Yisrael received the Torah at Sinai, they are powered by a different dynamo. They are powered by this word Anochi, where, and this is what I really wanted to get to, on the deepest level, the certainty, the knowledge, the unquestionable, undebatable knowledge of the truth of my own existence becomes synonymous with the knowledge of that there's Hashem in the world. The Anochi of Hashem becomes in the deepest root of ourselves. When I think of what I really am, from Sinai there comes, and this is the source of all our faith. This is the source of what makes Jewish people being able to give their lives up. It's not something intellectual. A person never will give his life up as something intellectual. Why? Because maybe I made a mistake. Maybe, okay, I'm bright, but maybe I made a mistake in my calculation. What makes a person be able to be moisa nefesh, to give over his soul, is when he understands that his soul, his deepest sense of his own existence, his neshama, is identical with that, so to speak, what is my sense of my I? It's no more than Hashem expressing himself in his world. The deepest sense of my own identity becomes synonymous with Emuna. That is what Emuna is, gentlemen. Emuna is not an intellectual thing. It is something in our neshama. It is something that Hashem put into our neshama at Sinai. Ana nashis ksivas yahavis anochi. My anochi, says Hashem Kaviyachol, is going to be identical with your anochi when everything is removed. Lahagid baboke chazdecha ve'emunasecha. The true emuna takes place baleilos, in the night, when everything else is removed except that voice, the deepest voice inside a person. That is the voice of the shofar. That is the voice. That's our expression. When we blow the shofar, we are basically we're saying, Hashem, the deepest sense of my own existence, which I can't put into words because it doesn't work through the trains of intellect. It works entirely as something beneath all knowledge, greater than knowledge, deeper than intellect. And it's therefore impossible to put that into words. You breathe that into my nostrils, that life comes in, and I became a ruach mamalala, a speaking spirit. And what do I speak? Ve'emunoscha baleilos. The deepest sense of my own existence is synonymous with my knowledge that there's a Borei Olam. It's not something intellectual. Twice a day, a Jew says, we have a mitzvah to say Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Because you see, if you think about it, as Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I exist. It's very easy to believe, to say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Ani Echad. I mean, I know I exist. I don't know about anything else. Maybe you guys all here you're just, marvelously sophisticated IMAX presentation. They still have IMAX? I have to be careful my cultural references. They still have IMAX. I'm sure in next year they'll have something much, much better than that. Probably the metaverse, right? Metaverse, that's taking over from that. Right? No, so, maybe you guys are just this sort of metaverse creation. I know I'm here. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Sure, there's a God, but Ani Echad. That's where I surrender. That's why I keep to myself my sense of my own identity. A Jew says, no, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. His oneness, V'hu echad ve'ein sheini. He is one, and there is no second. What does that mean? It means that his oneness precludes the existence of anything else. Now, I'm not going to go into this in great depth because it's not the place for it. And this is really, you should learn the Nefesh HaChaim, where he talks about these ideas. Chazal teach us Nefesh Chaim brings this, that when a person says Echad in Shema Yisrael, he should have the kavanah, he should have the thought, the intention, for a split second, Ein Od Milvado. Now, again, let me back up a bit. When we say Hashem is one, we don't mean there's just one God. You know, there's a God out there and we're down here. It means one. Absolutely one. A oneness which precludes anything else. Ein Sheni. There is no other existence. Ein Od Milvado. That nothing exists except Hashem. Now, this has led to big problems in the history of Judaism. Because if you take that and you live it out, if Hashem is everywhere, so, I could take Chas v'Chalila, a Sefer Torah into the bathroom, because Hashem's Echad, Hashem's everywhere. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where there's Shabbos and there's Chol, there's kosher, there's treif, and there's a very fine line, but there's a dividing line to everything. We don't live in a Hashem Echad world. We cannot live in that world, and we're forbidden to live in that world. But twice a day, for a split second, a Jew must think to himself, Hashem Echad, nothing exists apart from Hashem. Well, hang on a second, then who am I? I'm saying the Shema, aren't I? That's exactly what I'm talking about here. That split second, I surrender that deepest, most certain sense of my own existence to you, Hashem. You are Echad. And what I am is not merely, but is just one expression of who you are. This is the fountain of faith. This is why Jews say Shema Yisrael when they leave this world, when they give up their soul, because I'm giving up my own sense of my own ego, my own Anochi, to the Anochi at the beginning of the Ten Commandments. That Anochi, that I, the I of Hashem. Yeah. One last point. Adam Harishon, created on Rosh Hashanah, the day of the Shofar. Adam Harishon was the only human being who did not start life as a baby. However old, he was created as a full-fledged, sentient, aware. So imagine that split second of his creation. Suddenly, in a sense, he had an advantage which we don't have, because if you start off as a baby, so your perception of the world is so feeble that the amazing, frightening fact of existence becomes so second nature to you that by the time you have the intellect to comprehend the magnitude of what that means, you've already got used to it. Adam Harishon had the advantage that he came into existence as a fully fledged, fully sentient, totally aware. Now imagine being Adam Harishon, and imagine the first moment that you know you're here, that you know you exist. What would you do? I think you would utter a cry, and that cry would be the voice of the shofar. I exist! And also, there's something outside me. I exist, and there's something that I have to relate to. That's the cry of existence, the cry of I exist. And that cry of existence, each one of us on Rosh Hashanah, returns to Hashem. Ve'emunoscha b'leilos. On Rosh Hashanah, when we say we crown Hashem as King of the world, the mitzvah of the day is Shema Yisrael. Malchus, Ol Malchus Shemayim. The mitzvah of the day is the shofar, the coronation of the King. The King. And we do that by offering to Hashem, returning to Him, the speaking spirit that is our life, which declares Hashem Echad. Okay. Questions?
Thank you. But what
Okay.
About, what about Eve as well? Like,
What about Chava?
yeah, what about, yeah.
Chava, you're saying, was created as a full-fledged.
Yeah, from Adam's rib.
But it's a good question. Off the top of my head, I would say that only Adam Arishon was created ex nihilo, out of nothing, out of the dust of the earth. All other creatures came through some kind, if not through a natural birth, but through being drawn from another human being. And so Adam's experience was experientially different in as much that he came into existence from dust, from the dust. But I like, it's a good question. I have to think more about it. Yeah.
So if he came from the dust, how would he come from nothing, I guess? He came from something, right?
It came from something, but in terms of human life, he came from nothing. All other human life comes from human life. Okay, have a wonderful Rosh Hashanah.